Have you ever wondered how politicians raise millions overnight? Or why some judges get fast-tracked to the Supreme Court? What if we told you there's a hidden world of political finance that's shaping America's future? Buckle up. We're about to follow the money trail. Let's kick things off with a recent headline that caught a lot of attention. Vice President Kamala Harris apparently shattered records by raising a whopping $81 million for her campaign in just 24 hours. That's some serious cash, right? But it got us wondering, how exactly does all this money flow into politics, and where does it really come from? To understand what's going on, we need to go back in time a bit. In 2005, a former White House official from the Clinton era set up something called the Arabella Foundation. Now, their official line is all about strategic direction for effective charitable work. Sounds nice, doesn't it? But here's where things get interesting. It turns out, Arabella isn't just your average do-gooder organization. Instead, it seems to act as a kind of financial middleman. They take in huge sums of money from wealthy donors both in the US and abroad under the guise of humanitarian donations. But then, through some clever financial gymnastics, that money gets funneled into various left-leaning political organizations. One of Arabella's most notable creations is something called the 1630 Fund. In 2020 alone, this fund received a staggering $420 million in donations. That's not pocket change, folks. And where did all that money go? Well, it was spent on organizations and committees supporting the Democratic Party, funding election ads, and even running smear campaigns against political opponents. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. U.S. law says that any political donation over $200 has to be reported, with the donor's name attached. But through these complex networks of funds and organizations, individual donations can balloon to tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars, all without ever revealing who's actually writing the checks. Let's zoom in on one specific organization that benefits from this setup: Democratic Justice. These folks have a pretty clear mission. They want to get more left-leaning judges into powerful positions, including on the Supreme Court. One of their big wins? Pushing for the appointment of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. They spent years promoting her, and when the Democrats took control of the White House in 2021, boom, she was appointed to the D.C. Court of Appeals. But Demand Justice didn't stop there. They launched a massive lobbying campaign to pressure Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer to retire, clearing the way for Jackson to potentially take his seat. Now, this is where things get a bit complicated. Biden had promised to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court in the name of diversity. And that's a noble goal, right? But here's the thing. Judge Jackson wasn't actually the first black woman qualified for the position. Back in 2005, Judge Janice Brown was nominated for the D.C. Court of Appeals, and many expected her to eventually land on the Supreme Court. So, what happened? Well, it turns out that then-Senator Joe Biden actually blocked her nomination. Both Brown and Jackson are black women, but their judicial philosophies couldn't be more different. Brown is known for her conservative views, while Jackson aligns more closely with left-wing ideologies. Speaking of Judge Jackson, her appointment wasn't without controversy. She's known for supporting critical race theory and critical gender theory, ideas that have sparked intense debate in recent years. During her confirmation hearings, she famously declined to define the word woman when asked, saying she couldn't provide a definition. But perhaps the most contentious aspect of her record involves her rulings on cases involving crimes against children. Critics argue that she consistently handed down lighter sentences in these cases, sparking outrage among many observers. Now, let's shift gears and talk about another player in this world of political finance, Act Blue. This organization has developed a pretty clever and some would say questionable method for handling political donations. Here's how it works. ActBlue maintains a massive database of people who have previously donated to Democratic causes. When a wealthy donor wants to contribute a large sum, we're talking hundreds of millions here, ActBlue breaks that amount down into thousands of smaller donations. Each of these mini donations is then attributed to a name from their database, without that person's knowledge or consent. Why go through all this trouble? Well, it serves two purposes. First, it conceals the true source of the money. Second, it allows donors to blow past the legal limits on campaign contributions. Pretty sneaky, right? Remember how we started this whole discussion with Kamala Harris' record-breaking fundraising? Well, it turns out there might be more to that story. Recent reports suggest that her campaign is using ActBlue's services to process donations. Even more intriguing, there are claims that a significant chunk of that money, we're talking about $20 million, came from a Swiss billionaire named Hans-Jörg Weiss. Allegedly, this massive donation was split into over 1.6 million smaller contributions spread across 400,000 donors. So, what does all of this mean for American democracy? Well, it's complicated. On one hand, political campaigns need money to function. Ads aren't cheap, and reaching voters across a country as big as the US takes serious resources. But on the other hand, when the source of that money becomes so obscured, it raises some pretty big questions. Who's really pulling the strings? What do these mega donors expect in return for their contributions? And how can average citizens compete with this kind of financial influence? It's worth noting that this isn't just a left-wing issue. Similar practices exist on the conservative side of the political spectrum too. The use of dark money in politics has become increasingly common across the board, and it's a trend that has many political watchdogs concerned. So what's an engaged citizen to do in the face of all this? Well, staying informed is a great start. Understanding how these systems work allows us to ask better questions and demand more transparency from our elected officials. It's also important to remember that money isn't everything in politics. Grassroots organizing, volunteer work, and good old-fashioned voting still play crucial roles in shaping our democracy. While we might not be able to match the financial contributions of billionaires, our collective voices and actions can still make a huge difference. Lastly, as we've seen, the world of political finance is a lot more complex and potentially problematic than most of us realize. From shadowy foundations to clever donation schemes, there's a whole lot happening behind the scenes of our political system. The next time you see a flashy political ad or hear about a candidate's impressive fundraising haul, remember, there might be more to the story than meets the eye. Stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop asking questions. After all, in a democracy, an informed citizenry is our best defense against the influence of hidden money politics.